Good morning and welcome to the last of this series of coaching seminars hosted by SEMLA. From tomorrow, Lacrosse is back with the restarting of outdoor organised sports. We will continue seminars like this, but now the priority is putting into practice things that we've learned over the past few months during this lockdown. Topics for future seminars will include coaching like we have done all this lockdown, but also the wider lacrosse topics. So please contact us if you've got a specific topic that you'd like to have discussed, or indeed you would like to share. Maybe officiating, rules, equipment, how to promote and market lacrosse. Really, if it's related to lacrosse, let's share it, let's share the knowledge, get it recorded, get it pushed out there. Since going up on YouTube only a few days ago, the previous seminar recordings have been viewed nearly 100 times. So let's get that figure growing. Let's get these viewed and shared as widely as possible. Today's topic is all about me, you, and your teammates, as we have Chris Chapman talking about people, pressure, stress, and motivation. Chris has got lots to share, but this is also going to be interactive, so where we can actually have discussions as we go along on the topics Chris will be introducing. So if you have a question to share, put up your virtual hand or just jump in, or I'll cue you in as required. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'll let you introduce yourself, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, first of all, everyone, thank you for inviting me. I will say that Rob's going to manage the chat and the faces, because while I'm in presentation mode, it's difficult to see what's going on. So don't worry if you jump in or interrupt me. That isn't a problem. So again, just thank you for inviting me. Before we get into the content and the topic, just a little bit about me. So. If you like, my day job is I am the Learning Experience Manager at UK Coaching, which is a very fancy title to say that my day job basically is to identify, develop, in lots of cases write, or support subject matter experts to help them pull content together to be applicable and useful for coaches. So if you like, I get a great day job of working with coaches, subject matter experts, practitioners, just to create fantastic content for coaches. How did I get there? Well, in a former life, I was a PE teacher. While I was doing that, I was coaching. Having played very poorly and still live in rugby league. A long time ago now, I was lucky enough to be involved in the pathway as a volunteer. So I was teaching and coaching. The coaching within the school system for rugby league at that time was a very large commitment. So it was the premier youth program, so I was coaching sort of 28 to 30 weeks of the year with fixtures, training 2 or 3 times a week and every weekend. So it was a regular commitment to the highest, if you like, youth program. I was invited then to be involved in the representative pathway. That progressed to the point of in 2004, I applied for a role called the performance youth coach at that time, and I was basically the forerunner to what is now often known as a talent pathway. So I coached national age group teams from 16 to 20 and set the pathway up from 12 to right through to the under 20 age group. So it was my job to basically create a school's curriculum of learning development for the players, but also for the coaches. That transition to becoming a national player development manager, carried on coaching national teams, and then in 2013 even, I picked up the women's national team as the head coach. I coached them whilst doing my day job at very short notice to a World Cup. So I had like 3.5 months to prepare for a World Cup when a coach dropped out. And I then transitioned out into this role or into this organisation, but I carried on coaching England women and took them to the 2017 World Cup, and then left and stopped coaching the women in 2018. I moved on to UK coaching as they are now, initially as the talent and performance lead officer. So my role was to take my experiences in coaching, curriculum, working with players and coaches, and support all the governing bodies and lead on our specific programs for talent and performance coaches. So that's hopefully a taste of the jumping around I've done. So in simple terms, I'm a jack of all trades, really. Done lots of little things, not particularly well, but had a good time doing it. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to whiz into this. It was really interesting when Rob contacted me after the session. I think it was the first session I did for Lacrosse for James Powell. And we started off with a little conversation and a bit of swap through LinkedIn, and then it kept getting bigger and bigger with this presentation. And I think we sort of agreed there was maybe 3 or 4 things. So I'm just going to flick through some slides. Please just jump in, challenge, whatever you feel is right. This isn't this is perfect. This is what's worked for me and things that I think are quite important. So before we get into the detail of those 4 things, just some things that I think are really crucial as a coach. So I think if you're not self-aware, you've got some real challenges yourself. So you've got to be aware of how you are and how you react, how you impact on others. And when we start to talk about people and pressure, what you like on I talk about the word Barocca. So I use the example with coaches is that what you like on a good day, what you like on a not so good day, what irks you, what affects you and puts you under pressure, what are the things that you thrive in that environment. So if we can't see ourselves, we really struggle to recognize that in anyone else. And in my opinion, that's a really crucial foundation in order to be able to develop relationships, understand other people, co-regulate with them to get the best outcome. So when we talk about motivation and pressure and people, that's a significant factor. And then really simply, we've got, and I was chatting to somebody actually about this in Premier League 2 weeks ago. We've got all the science that tap in many sports, but what lockdown has done is it's made reduce the contact time, even in professional sport. It's meant there's less sports science, less meetings. What it's done is it's meant the coach has stripped back to the basics of observing, analysing, asking effective questions, and doing short, sharp sessions on the field. So it's gone back to perhaps the old school of coaching. But what's central to that is something that's pretty simple to say and quite complex to do, is it's about noticing. So I think the key thing for me is, as a coach, it's observing, it's noticing what's going on. And sometimes it's doing the simple things really consistently. And then the challenge for us as a coach, as you know, is to transfer from training into the game. And that's possibly one of the challenges that Rob wanted me to let us chat about later.
Yeah, Chris, I just want to jump in if I may there.
Yeah.
Just quickly, because that's already a key point for pretty much all of us. It's going to be next week, from next week, is going to be the first time we would have seen our teammates, our squads, for many months. So whilst many people have been speaking online and doing things like that is, when we actually see people face to face, we're going to work out, well, how are they feeling after lockdown? How has their experience been? Are they infused? Are they kind of gone? Are they now reserved because they've been in their own homes for so many months? So it's going to be really interesting to be aware of people who are going to come back into lacrosse with all different mental mindsets, and we've got to be aware of that, and as well as not being aware of what they can straight away do physically, because I'm sure there's some people who haven't kept up their fitness. Are they be able to do everything straight away mentally? Would that be what simple things would you say to a coach to just what things can a coach kind of look at and see that might help understand where all the players are?
Well, I think the noticing bit, first of all, is to have a look at how people arrive, isn't it? So the individuals that you coach and you haven't seen for a while, is you'll have a vision in your mind, and that's why I put the jelly babies up, is that, you know, we're all slightly different, and the reality is that you've got to notice what's different. You'll have had contact with people, you'll recognize, hopefully, because it's about building that relationship, you'll recognize that some people are more reticent, some people will be really up for it. And certainly speaking to coaches, give you an example, most of the coaches that I speak to from team sports can't wait to get back to coaching. They're chomping at the bit, they're desperate, and they're really, really keen. When we talk to coaches who coach individual sports, there's a lot of more concern and worry, and they're quite fearful about going back to coaching in some instances. And one of the reasons for that is that they've been quite isolated. And so many feel that they haven't had as much contact from the governing body, and they're a bit fearful about going back. And in the words of a coach I spoke to last week, is I feel a bit rusty. And I think that's a really good analogy for our our athletes, so for your players, is are they feeling a little bit rusty? So there's a lot of things to be observing, and Rob picked them up really. How are they acting in a social setting? Some people will not genuinely have been able to, because they're either shielding or caring for somebody, interacting with lots of people. So there's an opportunity to, if you like, social engagement and just reconnect. Being observant of how people are acting and reacting. I think one of the things for me as well is just to remind people that we've seen lots of quotes over lockdown about, we're all in the same storm, but everyone's in different boats. I think it's just reminding everybody else, and that might be in your team very explicit, or it might be a little bit subtle. So you've got people that will be managing homeschooling, they'll be managing care, they'll be managing all sorts of things that have been quite a challenge. There'll be other people potentially that have had none of those challenges, and because of their work have been out and mixing every day. And it might be that you remind everybody that everyone's coming from a different position, and you start that way. Or it might be that you speak to the individuals that you notice are either looking a little bit frustrated, feeling that they've done everything right. And I've certainly seen that with a break when you get an international team and a club side coming back. And so they come back off pre-season. You get somebody who's frustrated because they've done everything that's been asked, and they feel that other people are dragging them down. And it's how we manage that and manage that team dynamic. So I think there's some bits around what we can do. So practical things are get the team back involved in connecting things. So social activities on the field, so high communication games, social engagements, ones where you've got to work together within your social distancing constraints of your sport. There's things to be mindful about physical capacity. So what you want to put into them as a coach, knowing that you've got games coming up, isn't necessarily what's able to happen. So to bring you a real life example, because of the difference between, for rugby league yesterday, the Super League started, and because of the difference in France, the French team, Chapman Dragons, have only had 3 weeks of preparation because that's all they're allowed in France. So their volume and load that the coaches have been able to put into them is significantly different. And we saw that in the game. They set off like a house on fire, and actually they blew up. If we take that to a training session, we might need to reduce the volume of our training session, reduce the intensity of it. We might need to think about differentiating the pitch up a little bit, so shortening the pitch up, even putting people on different pitches based on their energy levels and fitness levels, or reducing our session and putting more breaks in to give them that recovery time from a physical point of view. And then from a mental point of view, there's the point that Rob mentioned before. People might be coming just simply for a release. So it's just recognizing how people are struggling, noticing that. And I think that's really, really quite important, because ultimately, and it goes back to the pressure, people, and motivation. I put all sorts up there because we all come as a package. We really like to think at times that we coach, we coach the sport, we coach the people, but we coach the whole person. How they turn up and show up influences how we treat them. You'll have players that are highly motivated and some that need a lot more extrinsic motivation, nudging from you. And depending on your approach to that, I remember reading about Jose Mourinho's view, and his view is, I'm not there to motivate them. I'm there just to channel their motivation. If I can't motivate them, and we see that in the media quite a lot, don't we? About football, is they should just turn up and love it. The amount they're getting paid. Well, they don't play the sport for the money. They play for the buzz and the enjoyment of the sport. The money's a sideline, and you only have to think about your jobs. There are 2 reasons why we get fulfillment in our roles. There is a bit about money and meeting our minimum needs, but they talk a lot more about that being that's a double negative, less important, and more about feeling valued and cared for, feeling a part of the organisation in a bigger picture. So if we take those into our sporting context, they need to feel valued. They need to feel that they're being welcomed back in. Your players need to feel like they're all part of one structure. And so there's all the things that you can bring together that start to connect that. And that starts, I think, real simply into the motivation. And we'll come to that in a little while. Hopefully, Rob, that sort of helps answer your question.
It does, yeah. And we've got a few more people on the call now, including some of our more experienced coaches. And I think it's plainly obvious, but the first few training sessions that we have now from next week, just obviously don't go in and beast everyone, sort of ease people back into it. but that's probably obvious, and every coach would have done that, but understand. But that's just need to reinforce that. Otherwise, it should be obvious to those who are planning the first few training sessions back. Definitely. But of course, just remind for those who joined, jump in at any time, raise your hand any time. I'll cue you in if you've got any questions to Chris. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you. So just some of the people that you probably see in your environment, and I know certainly when Rob and I did it, and I'll give you a moment to read them. I'm not going to read them out to you. But they're the type of characters that when I work with coaches, when I've coached my teams, they're the type of people that show up and turn up, even in a high performance team.
Yeah, I think we've all got various people who fit those categories in our various squads.
And so it's managing those. And one of the first conversations Rob and I had is we don't have the luxury always when we're coaching in a community setting or we're coaching within a regional structure. We don't always have the luxury of being able to just select the best. We almost select who's there, and we have to maximize it. And that's our job as a coach: is what do we need to do to tip the most into those individuals. And if I look at all of those, as much as it might be frustrating as a coach to look at those, they're all individual challenges that as a coach, they excite me. So the quick rise, high rise, quick fall reminds me of quite a few players in rugby league. And sometimes the reason why they've risen quickly is because they're athletic, but they're quite young. And so when we talked before about what have they got, sometimes they struggle to interact in an adult setting. So the social pieces, they might portray themselves as quite robust and tough and they can cope with it, but actually they struggle with some of the what might be termed banter and the interaction in an adult setting. It might be that they're not able to perform at that level psychologically. And it's simply things like the games are much faster than they expected. They can play for a short period of time, not a long period of time. So the challenge there is, what do I need to give that player? What support, what challenges, what puzzles, and what conversations do I need to have until they feel confident to do that? Because for me, and one of my last slides is a simple analogy, which is don't be anyone's last coach. So you don't want to be the person that because of your coaching experience, they leave. So each one of those offers different challenges in different ways, can deliver, but is fragile, injury prone. So what is it they need to do and understand they need to do as an individual in order to be robust enough to be able to handle the physicality of your game? And that might be an age range thing, and it might be you managing that as a coach. It could be getting to the back end of the career. I took two players to the World Cup in 2017 who in 2013 thought they were retiring. Both had children, both had time out. I should have said I coached the women's team. So both had childbirth in that window post 2013. So I had children in 2014 or 2015 and got back into the program, the physicality of it. One in particular was 35. Her performances on the field warranted her to be selected for the international team, but it meant we had to manage her load. Her training commitments were massively different. When we went to the World Cup, she had a 2-year-old, and so those things need to be managed. And we had to manage her volume, manage her load, and train her differently, so she had the capacity to be able to play and perform on a world stage in a World Cup, and not be underdone, should I say? But also, she couldn't. Had to manage her minutes. We had to think about her recovery, and she had a very different recovery protocol. Now that's quite at the top end, but we can still think about how we do those things. You'll all have got a needy athlete, the one that doesn't leave you alone, the one that you're chasing. Well, it's how do we develop them? Because what they're likely to be lacking is confidence or self-belief. So it's the things that we need to put into an individual that's starting to experience how we create a connection and we co-develop the program with them. And that's a challenge when we work in a team sport and we're working a couple of evenings a week. So there's a lot of things that influence us. And I think one of the things that I talk a lot to coaches about is we can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So the reality is the pressure that they're going to be under. I heard Rob say at the beginning when he was chatting, you're going to be playing next week and you're going to start to play the league out. You can't change that. Lockdowns come out. The fixtures are the fixtures. You've got your games to play. But actually, it's how we play effectively. What is it we're going to do as a collective team How am I going to develop these people skills to be able to cope with those things? So really quickly, and just as we start to explore pressure a little bit, I just want you to think about something for a moment. So just think for a second. I want you to think about your favorite song. So in your mind, your favorite song, it might be the one that reminds you of a period of your life. It might be a song that you're brilliant at karaoke. It might be a part of a key moment, or it might just be something where the words mean a lot to you. So just think about that song for a second. And what I'd like you to do is just now play through in your mind that verse. So either the first verse or the chorus. Okay, I'm going to ask Rob to pick somebody because I can't see you at the moment. So, Rob, I want you to think about who's on the call now, somebody who's going to sing. So I'm going to let you know, folks, in a minute, I'm going to ask somebody to sing that first chorus.
Pressure's on. Who am I going to pick?
This is when they'll drop off the call.
Yeah. Well, I can't find their mute buttons.
Exactly. We had that on a session on Friday where people were in an interactive session. Immediately we got 3 messages. I'm not able to speak on my call. So have you picked somebody, Rob?
Yeah.
Who are you picking?
Go on, David. What have you got for us?
Right, David.
All right. Cheers, Rob. I'll remember that.
I'll just stop you there, David. This is a key thing. I don't actually want you to. I don't actually need you to sing. What I want you to do is tell us how you felt when you thought you're going to have to sing in front of your peers.
Well, I don't put any pressure on because I know exactly how the performance is going to be. So yeah, and I'm used to making a bit of a prat of myself. So, but yeah, I can imagine if you wanted to perform well, that would be a horrible anticipation there.
Brilliant, and I really appreciate that, David, because what you've told us is a bit about your self-awareness and a realistic, what they might talk in France in terms of realistic performance evaluation. If it was me who's tone deaf, so I'm the person at every school was told by the teacher, everyone can sing, and then told to mime in the carols. So that's my worst nightmare. And it was probably till I got into my 40s when, with my partner, we used to joke, I've been to one of them bad karaoke competitions where everyone's meant to sing stupid. I've won it by trying my best. So, yeah, we all have different things. And the reason why I wanted to ask that, David, is as you said, you're very self-aware, but there'll be somebody in the room who's gutted they didn't get asked because they're up for the challenge of singing in front of everyone. That's their best day. And for other people, it's a nightmare. And that's what we've got to remember is that pressure is a perception and it means different things to different people. So you'll all have players that they love the big game. They want to perform when pressure's there, and other people that don't perform and find that much more difficult. So our job as a coach is to work out when do people perform at their best and how do we do that. So I've got real life examples where I never played a particular player internationally off the bench because it was too much thinking time for her. So whilst when we tried that in rotations in a build up to a major tournament, she struggled to come off the bench because she was overthinking things. I had a player in particular that really stepped up when it was a big game, but didn't really deliver at lesser fixtures. So that was quite an interesting one for us because she just didn't get up. So we had to work with her to set personal targets and personal goals. So we created increased pressure for her at both domestic level and some of the what I might call development fixtures in order to create that challenge. So how do we create that challenge and pressure for different people? And the reason for that is hopefully this slide, which says, I think this is probably the best takeaway you can have when we're looking at creating pressure and stress for people. So ultimately, I said right at the beginning, your job is to create people who can perform in a competition. So what do? We need them to be able to perform the skill well. So that's our job. So perform a skill, perform it well. Can they perform it at speed? So can they make those decisions quickly? Can they deliver it? Can they do it under fatigue? Can they do it under pressure? Can they do that consistently? And then can they produce that in competition? And it's a really useful slide. We've used this at international level when we were looking at selecting and managing players. So it's almost like under our shared mental model as a coaching team and staff, can they all perform the skills? So genuinely, at the highest level, International Rugby League for the women's game, there are some players that can perform very well and at speed, but under fatigue at a higher level, when the game is played at a higher tempo, they struggle a little bit. You'll know players, and those I know Robert told me there's some international coaches, there'll be, and former international coaches on the call. There'll be those that struggle to perform under pressure, and there are those that can't perform consistently. So we've got a matrix that says we know where people are at the moment. And we can start to consider the things that we need to do either for selecting players at times, and that might be the reason why they're not selected, or it could simply be this is our continuum and these are the areas we need to challenge. So as a team, I would guess coming back from lockdown under fatigue is a bit of a challenge. So it's how do you manipulate the time you've got under your lockdown and return to play rules into competition? How do you fatigue your players? How do you get them to work so that they're having to make decisions when they're tired? They're still performing at speed. So is it a case of fatiguing them and then putting them into games? Is it a case of doing games in a particular way to fatigue them and making sure you still don't lose that speed? And then what does the pressure look like? How do you create that pressure and that stress within them? So some things to think about on the stress process. So obviously this is how we all perceive stress. So there's a stressor that comes in. So that could be, in simple terms, late for a meeting. We recognise that because we're stuck in traffic. We're late for that meeting. It's a long time since people have had to do this. We're back on the roads. It's getting busy. The clock's ticking. I've recognised I'm not going to get there in time. I wanted to set my presentation up. I'm now starting to recognise that the chief exec's there. There's a few other people in the room. So I'm starting to see the stressor is I'm going to be late. I recognise the things that are going to start to happen. My response is I start to worry. I start to make excuses up. I start to drive faster. I start to panic about it. I start to get distracted. I'm starting to get my notes out in the car because I'm looking at it. So there is a response that I have. How we cope with that can be very different. So for somebody, they might ring up and say, I'm stuck in the car. Can I move my meeting slot? Somebody else might not have the confidence to do that and be trying to get there faster, get done for 3 points of speeding. And that affects the outcome. So there's a really simple stress model. And if we take it into sport, we've got so many things that influence us in that respect. So stresses that include the competition, traveling to a competition, my age, how I'm feeling, am I recovering from an injury? Is that injury too much? It might be simple things at your level around forgetting kit. It might be change your kickoff time. It could be that I've not had my favourite meal. I remember going in 2001. Amazed me this. Things have changed since then. But in 2001, went to New Zealand with the under-18s for a 7-week tour. Fantastic tour, longest tour I've ever been involved in. Went for a 7-week tour. So we were out there for 8 weeks in total, including climatisation. And one of the players came from one of the clubs, and he just said, "Oh, I can't play unless I've had Jaffa cakes." Well, they don't sell Jaffa cakes in New Zealand, and psychologically, the impact that caused, the stress that caused in game one for him was unbelievable. To the point of the head coach was thinking that we potentially wouldn't play him. So, what are the stressors that influence them? And then, how do we get people to manage that? So, some things that we might want to consider as coaches. Making them self-aware. So we talked about us as coaches being self-aware, but how self-aware are our athletes when they're under pressure, when they're stressed? Do they understand how they act and react on the field? Is they not, as a normal chilly person when they play a game, suddenly aggressive and snappy with everyone? Are they taking people with them, or are they challenging other people? When things go wrong, do they go into the shell? When the pressure steps up, do they hide? And I'm gonna share an example now of somebody who I think stepped up with their perception of a conversation with me. So this player's given me permission to talk about this. So this was in 2015. So we're halfway in a World Cup cycle for us, and we'd gone through quite a few changes. We'd had quite a lot of retirees. I mentioned before about people having time out for babies and different things like that, family commitments and life. So we had quite a developmental team at the time as an international setup, and about 50% of the squad were either going to be debutants or around that fringe of playing one fixture. And in a training session, we play a lot of shape structure within rugby league. So we'll play what we call left v right. So if you imagine the rugby team there, we almost fold it in half, and our left side plays against our right side. And so when we do that, one of the places you can hide is in the middle. So we always throw the extra bodies in to make the pitch, because it's not exactly 50-50. We sort of play like 60% of both sides of the field. So we use extra bodies to make the numbers up, and it's an 8-a-side game. And there was a young, she was at the time, very young. She was just at university. She was still 18, but she was at university. A young player, and she was playing centre. And she put herself out there, and she was making lots of mistakes. She was making errors. She was getting her footwork wrong, but she kept turning up all the time. And some of the other players that realised that they thought that they might look bad, or they might make a mistake or fail, started hiding in the middle. So they would go and do their role for like 1 or 2 goes and then disappear as quick as you can. And in fairness to Jess, she stayed out there. And I was really impressed. I was really impressed with her sort of resilience and desire and motivation to get it right. I was really impressed with the way that she acted and reacted to making those mistakes. And the bit I'm telling you now is the bit that's the kicker. I was really impressed with her. And we were actually going to play France in about a month. And as a coach, I sat down, well, we're literally taking our boots off next to each other. And I took the opportunity to say to her, you did really well today. I'm really, really pleased with the way that you put the effort in and you stayed out there. So that was really fantastic. I think you need to decide now where you are as a player. And are you going to step up and be a test match player, or are you going to be part of the squad? And we had a really nice conversation afterwards. And I went away thinking, right, I've basically said to her that she's going to France. She just needs to work out whether she's going to be playing in the starting team, and is she going to push on to try and get that starting 13 shirt. I got a text from her about 2 hours later, which I'm really pleased. I must confess that creating an environment where people feel they can check and challenge. She said, why don't you think I'm good enough to play for England? So I texted her straight away saying, I'm not sure what you mean. Can we speak? And we arranged to speak on the phone later that evening. And the reason I mention that, and I've said that to a lot of people, is my view of that conversation was I primed her to the next level of challenge, the next level of stress. What she heard was, you're not good enough. And I'm so pleased that she spoke to me, because it meant that we could have a conversation. I could reset that, and it made me do a number of simple things. When I have a conversation with a player, I check in to make sure they tell me always what they think I've said. So how do we develop the self-awareness of our players? Like David said, he understands his own threshold when it was coming to singing, and he didn't put any expectations on himself. He's self-aware. So that's one of the things we can do to manage pressure and stress.
I just want to just pause there if I can, Chris. I'm just interested. We've got on the line, and hopefully you'll be okay with this. We've got Pete Compton, one of our most experienced junior coach, and doing it for decades. Pete, I'd love it if you could just say a couple of words, because on that particular topic, you would have seen over the last 4 decades, is it? But all those 14, 15-year-olds, and how many times have you had similar discussions about, right, I think you're ready for the next level, and or anything else that Chris has said so far? Is there anything that is worth sharing at this point, Pete? Check he's on.
Sorry, I was. As you probably gathered from my age, I'm not easy with telecommunications, so it took me a second or two to figure this thing out. Hopefully, you can hear.
Fine. Yeah, we can hear you. Crack on. Crack on.
Not so much, really. I mean, the things you've mentioned, I can recognise over the years that I have coached. One kid at the moment, really, who's anxious about moving up, and I'm not sure I've got the conversation with him right yet. So it definitely happens, and this does mirror my experience. I'm not sure if that's what you want me to say.
That's fine, Pete. It's just having that dialogue, and so we can tease out as much learning as possible from this. Thank you. Chris,
You are
back
right,
to you.
Pete. You are right, because it is a dialogue, and I think that's the crucial thing. And depending on, you will have athletes who perform brilliantly but not self-aware, and sometimes that plays to the strengths on the field, doesn't it? So I've worked with senior players who are not really self-aware. My captain, I worked a lot with my captain. I took to the 2017 World Cup. I worked a lot on how she acts and reacts in a competitive environment. So she's perhaps what we might perceive as she demonstrates a lot of male behaviours. So she's got no problem with giving it to somebody, telling them they're not good enough, asking them to step up. Now, for some of the women in the team, that's the worst thing that can happen to them. And she might tell them that our mistake's not good enough, and actually they need to move on. And so it was making her self-aware as a captain and a leader of the team. Her job isn't to play her frustrations out or deal with it how it works for her, but it's actually how it works best for the individual. And that's the same for us as coaches. I can give an example. I coach Cassie's under 20, so Castleford Tigers under 20, so the reserve grade as it is. And when we were coaching there, the head coach at the time, who was full-time, got very frustrated with the team. We were part-time players compared to everybody else. We were operating on a very small budget, and we'd lost 2 or 3 games. And if I'm honest, he was trying to throw a game plan that you would give to full-time athletes in a full-time environment with a 30 plus. And whilst many other teams that were playing were in that situation, we had people who were digging holes Monday to Friday and getting up at 5 in the morning. We had plumbers, we had kids at university and different things. So we were a bit of a ramshackle. They were all doing the best they could, but he didn't really understand the constraints. And he was almost, the way I always describe it is, he was putting on the expectations of a semi or a professional environment onto semi-professional and part-time players. And he got very frustrated. The technical game plan was quite challenging. As it happened, he went away for his daughter's wedding abroad, so he was actually away for 3 weeks, and I was asked to pick up the team. And this has got nothing really to do with what I did. It's more to do with how we talk to people, I think. So I sat down with the players and we discussed a number of things. They were very honest to tell me they didn't understand all the game plan. It was a bit too complicated for them, and it was too much change for them. So we simplified it. So we created a plan where we did the same thing consistently, and then we had a plan B. So we played a particular style and we just did it, and we got some success. And then when the opposition started to work that out, we switched it to a plan B, and we kept it really simplistic. So rather than having the players reading the game, making decisions dynamically, that was too much for them at the time. It was cognitive overload. They felt too much pressure. So we went to right, I'm the coach. Let's play this style of play, and when they work it out, we'll switch. We managed to get to a nice start. We got a couple of early tries, and the confidence of the team grew. Over those 3 weeks, we played 4 games. We ended up winning 3. That year, we were 80 minutes away from playing the grand final. So in a 16-team competition, we were down to the last 4, and we were winning with 30 minutes to go against a team that had, I think it was 9 or 10 full-time athletes in the starting 13. We had 1. So it's about hooking into our individuals, and I think that links into my piece around the competition plan. So how do you develop your competition plan for your athletes? What are the things that they need to think about? And I'll come to some things that we need to consider, but are they preparing themselves for that competition? Do you understand how each player prepares? I know when I played that I like to get changed. I don't need to be out there super early, but I need to be changed and not rushed. I need to be nice and methodical. I know other people that literally as soon as they arrive at the venue, they're stripped and changed and pumped up. There are other people that like to listen to music. There are others that like their own space. So what is it in the competition plan? And then how do they manage that? And a really powerful thing for me, and I do this a lot with lots of teams, is the what if then what. So do we do it technically? Do we do it tactically? Do we do it with the coaches from injuries? Do we do it around traveling to a game? So to give you some examples, what happens if the bus doesn't turn up or we're late to a game? What happens if we plan for a kickoff time at a certain time and then there's a fixture overrun or there's an injury on the field and we start later? How do our players act? What do we do if we get reduced warm-up time? We can't warm up in the place that we thought we could. What if, from an athlete point of view, the laces snap or they get the wrong kit or they're not happy about something, something doesn't fit right. They don't get the travel food. And it's real simple things, but it's helping it. We've had players, we put strategies in that our players are all expected to put a grab bag of food when they travel abroad. We've got some really picky eaters. And that used to be a big problem for one player. And just by simply taking snacks and sorting them out, took away a lot of pressure for them when they were traveling. Little things around getting them familiar with the venue. And Rob and I spoke before about getting them familiar with the venue. Resetting how the importance of it is. I see this with lots of junior coaches quite a lot, that they coach in a particular competition a particular way, and then it gets to the final or the semi-final, and suddenly they put the pressure on because they want to make it feel special. So training twice a week becomes training 5 times. They suddenly put a pre-match meal on. They invite parents to it. They get 3 different guest speakers to come in. They suddenly talk about putting special drinks on the pitch sideline. We'll provide sports drink. We'll buy a new top. And it all sounds very grand. And for some players, they're really emotional and invested in that moment and loving it. For others, that's their worst nightmare, because you're just putting pressure on all the time, and there's this fear of failure. So how do we challenge ourselves as a coaching team? One of the things that we always play when we select a test team is the what if and then what. And I shared with Rob when we chatted about this session. There's one where I learned a lot about players as well, the other way around, about not putting people into boxes. So we have a key role within rugby league, the hooking position. So I don't know how much you know about it, but basically rugby league is you get 6 tackles and then you have to trade the ball. So it's a territory-based game. So in simple terms, you trade possession for territory and you try and score tries. But the player that every time we have a tackle that restarts the game predominantly is our hooker. So it's a significant role. They're the start of all our offensive attack. This player went down after a few minutes, and we hadn't really played a what-if scenario. Because they were an 80-minute player, we hadn't got anyone on the bench to do that. And it totally threw us a little bit. And I moved a player, the fullback, I moved her into the hooking position. And she was exceptional. And I've got to be honest with you, it's a lesson for me that I didn't really give every player at international level. They came under a playing position, and what it did is it changed my view of players. So she played hooker once or twice before as a junior, but because she'd been picked as a fullback, and at her club they wanted her to be fullback because they'd already got a hooker, I never even looked at it for that position, about different playing positions. So the if what then what scenario was quite powerful for me. It made me think not just about how do I prepare a team to do that, but also how many opportunities do I give players to play in different playing positions. And that's even as seniors, because if we're doing rep, they might have come from a club where they play that position because they're one of the better players. How do we create challenge and support? Well, we'll come to that in the next slide. And then it's this stress inoculation training. How do we create pressure for our players? So just some examples for you. Some of these are age grades, some are adults, and I think you'll see a lot of these. So the pink kit one is before pink was a trendy colour for boys. So in the regional academy that I set up, the 3 regional academies, one of the things that we did is we put a team, and we told them there was an error, and we put them in a pink kit. And at that time, that was probably one of the worst things that you could give a team. It was sort of like, this isn't what we want. It was fascinating, even after the game, that a young male player blamed wearing a pink kit for a poor performance. It was such a learning curve for them and for us to be able to manage about how they can manage distractions, let things go. But one player told us they weren't bothered about playing on the sideline. So it was fascinating. It was deliberate. We put these things in to see how people react. So it's taking those opportunity. With the women's team, instantly enough, the kit size one. So when I first took over the team, the women only got male sizes. So as you can imagine, they're not particularly flattering, and particularly a rugby league shot has not a very flattering cut around the groin. And the kit person just had no idea of the influence and impact that had on the players. And I watched an international team, and I watched women whose job is to catch a ball. And we can all say that they've got a job to do. But I actually watched I will say most of the pack. So 3 or 4 players spending most of the time trying to pull the shorts down because they were very conscious of how it was rearing up around their thighs. And that was a massive impact on their performance. And does that cause them to make errors? So there's a way where we can manipulate an issue, but also how do we remove it? So it was one of my priorities when I came back, and we changed kit manufacturers to get the sizing right for them. An example of kicking at Headingley. Headingley's the home, as well as cricket, of rugby league, so the Leeds Rhinos. And I was fortunate enough that when there was a big derby game, we took some of our junior internationals just to experience kicking in front of 15,000 people. So we had our under 15s at the time, 16s and 18s internationals. So there was about 10, 15 youngsters kicking on the field, just to experience what it was like. Now the fans were brilliant, and they made it a good experience for them. But just the nerves of kicking, even simple kicks in front of a crowd, hearing the noise, hearing the buzz, the energy level. So we gave them that experiences, and how do we create that in our practice? I think it's really important that we change our warm-ups up. So how do we manage that? And I gave Rob an example of, I was mentoring the under-16s head coach when we were in France with rugby league, and as sometimes happens with the French, they changed the kick-off time, and then we were playing in Albi, and it's a fantastic ground. It's a real cathedral, and you actually go from a concrete jungle, you go underneath the ground, and you come up actually like an amphitheatre, so it's like a gladiator. When you come out, you walk out onto the field. And it's a brilliant experience. Excuse me. But the French told us that we couldn't warm up on the pitch, which meant we had to go out through the back, along the side of the ground, and train or do our warm up on a scratty bit of grass out the back. Whereas the French were allowed to warm up, they told us there was a problem at our end. So there was a bit of mind games going on straight away, and you accept that. And we went out the back, but it did mean that our planned time, and we found this quite short, we lost 6 or 7 minutes off our preparation time. And those that have coached internationally know that your final running is quite important. So your transition time, getting the strap in, getting the prep time, go out for your warm up, come back in, team talk, conversation, leave the place to hydrate, do the last bits, get into the tunnel for kickoff. All that is quite time precious, and you're down to minutes. Now, the reason I tell you this is how an assistant coach managed it. So instead of tweaking the warm-up, the assistant coach just ran the players through the warm-up so fast to cover everything. And he was getting very anxious, and he was challenging the players for hurrying up, speed up. He stopped them having water breaks. So when we did the review and the debrief, we sat down with him and we spoke to him about what's the purpose of a warm-up, and he's like, well, it's to prepare them to play. So then we played back to him what we observed, because it is a learning opportunity for staff as well. So the pressure he put himself under to do the warm-up correct meant that he didn't give the athletes a true warm-up. And so we said things that he could have done differently. We spoke about it, and he came up with this himself, which was to shorten the warm-up. So we looked at what's crucial in a warm-up, what must we have, what could we have, and what should we have. We started to look at the language he used, and actually, when we unpicked it, he probably did more damage than benefit as part of that warm-up. So we're looking at that. An example I've done with this pressure of practice, and I shared with Rob, the removing a player. So in a team session, and I mentioned before the hooker, just before we'd set a scenario up, and we used to play these extended fatigue games. So we would start to play for 12 minutes. One of the things that I learned, and it's always a balancing act at international level, is the S&C and the physios are trying to give them less time and load, and I'm trying to put a little bit more into them. So there's always that wrestle with your rest of your multidisciplinary team about the time that you get. And we used to play these 12-minute games because the players started to make, as you would imagine, get fatigued. It was less about freshness, and it was about making good decisions under pressure. And just before we were about to start the activity, I just called Lois, one of my players, over and said to her, just come here a minute. And she's like, well, I need to get there for kickoff. And I actually deliberately didn't say anything to anybody. We removed the hooker. So we took her off the field. So they kicked off and they played 12 minutes. It was 9 minutes into that game before they recognised they'd lost a key player. So with the pressure of what was going on, and then wanting to perform as a team, they were arguing with each other, falling out, blaming somebody else not getting to the break. Nobody spotted that they'd lost a player, and they were playing with 12 players instead of 13, and a pivotal player. So it was 9 minutes before somebody realised that Lois wasn't there. So that was an interesting one about how we then not just do the activity, but we have the conversation about what's our role, what could we do differently, how will we manage this.
Sorry, Chris, that's something that I've seen a few times in lacrosse, and the others would have seen as well. Particularly, say for the people on the call, say a man up play, and you've got your 6 players who you want to be in the man up, but one of those players might be on the bench, might be just off the field, and suddenly there's only 5 people out there, and people are going, hang on, what's going on? It completely throws them. So you throw on someone else for the 6th person, but it's not the normal 6 that have been running in training, and the man up play is a disaster because it's just subtly different to what people have tried at training.
Yeah.
And there's other things, and the removing of the play, I found that really interesting when we spoke a week or so back. Most of the sort of the mid low tier clubs within the SEMLA region, there will be 2 or 3 sort of key players who bring everyone up to the level. If one of those players sort of isn't available, or maybe takes a knock and is off for a few minutes, that can really throw a team. And they're the sort of things that I've seen over the last few years. So little ideas about, in a training session, maybe calling that key player over and say, actually, just step out for 5 minutes on this one. Let's see them do it without you there, and get the players to adapt. Anyone else to throw in any comments, that would be wonderful. If not, you can crack on, please, Chris. If we can go for another 10 minutes, that would be. Oh, look, Anthony, is that you coming in?
It is, yeah. I was just going to say, one of the things that we did, we was playing 6-on-6, and I'd spoken to the defence and give the defenders a number, and told them, if I call your number, you've got to come out and then sprint out of the drill, run round at me, and then go back into the drill. But what the attackers didn't realise, obviously the game went on, but the attackers didn't realise that they were actually a man up while this player came out of the drill. They was a man up, and it took them a bit to recognise what was going on. So that was a case of how you can introduce it into your drills, into actually when we're playing the game.
Thank you. That's good. Chris, so we go for another 10 minutes if we can, or maybe 5 minutes, and then we can have 5 minutes of discussion. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Just linking to those bits that Rob mentioned.
Oh, sorry, I got kicked out there. What were you saying there, Anthony? Something about sprinting out.
Yeah, so basically you were pulling a player out of the actual drill. So you're playing 6-on-6, but what we hadn't done is we hadn't told the attackers that we were pulling a player out of the drill. So it was a case of the attack didn't recognise. It took them a bit to recognise that while they came out, which might have been 15 seconds, they didn't recognise that the team was a man down, and they could have, there was somebody free within the playing 6-on-6. So it became 6-on-5, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a great example of an activity where we're creating problems for our athletes to solve, and we don't always give them the answer. And I think what you just said, Anthony, is brilliant, because it's so easy to tell them, I'm going to put this activity on, so there'll be a player off the field, and what will we do? And you almost feed them into it. So I think what you've done there is a brilliant learning opportunity. Just a couple of other examples linking to that, really, and changing playing positions. So as Rob mentioned, getting players that your key players are in or out, actually getting people to play up in different roles. Now, a big thing for us at an international level is your best players, usually exactly what Rob said, they start every game. So actually how do players act and react coming off a bench? And that was one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, and that influenced not just, like I mentioned before, who doesn't start on the bench, and that was to do with the psyche stuff, but actually them experiencing coming off the bench, and how do they concentrate, how do they warm up and prepare. So how do we have those things to have an impact player? They had a player that went to the World Cup in 2017 who we sold the entire 5 weeks we're out there was impact. So her whole ethos, her whole development plan was on impact. So she was a middle forward, and everything she did was around impact. So we talked about her being a skittle. So she skittled people over. We talked about a quick play of the ball, and everything she was told is everything you do is about an impact. You're an impact player. You come off the bench, you have an impact. So we cued everything. Even her physical development was down to no. She wasn't going to play 80 minutes. She was going to play 15 minutes, have a recovery in 15 minutes again. So how do we get people to do that? How do we tweak those things? How do we give people different playing position experiences? Younger players may not necessarily come straight into your team and play key positions. They may play edge or lesser positions as they're gaining experience. There's all these things that we can start to explore. We all probably know from our time that even just playing up. So when I was a youngster, you went straight into the A team, so 16 to 18. So if you were good enough, you were playing men coming back from injury, and to some extent, you either survived or you didn't, and that was the nature of the game. And you had people trying to prove a point, and you got knocked around, and there is a lot more to developing and supporting our participants than there was certainly back then in the 80s. And in simple terms, pressure is the event plus how we react to it, and that's the outcome we get. And we need to think about that as coaches on the sideline. How do we manage our behaviours, and how do we influence the pressure of our team? I gave an example to Rob where I think it's okay as long as it's controlled and considered. So I'm going to give you an example of where I did something to get a reaction. We had a third test match in France, and the team we started off very, very well and really nice shape, nice structure, but we just didn't score. And after 3 or 4 high quality attacks, the French got confidence that we didn't score against them, and we started to get a bit of disbelief. And they actually scored on us a couple of times, and they did some unorthodox things. They put numbers down a particular side, which doesn't happen very much in rugby league because we tend to defend and shape up in a way. And they played a very different style of play and got some success against us. We didn't react to that. But the players started blaming each other. So when half time came, we started having, instead of having 13 players in one vision, we started to have a lot of individuals. So my routine when I come in half time internationally is as they come in, they get the drinks are on the seats, they sit down, they go to the toilet, and I give them 1 or 2 minutes just to check. While that's happening, I go around and I speak to every single individual player, and I just quietly tell them what they're doing well, and it's all positive structural stuff. So it's just about, you can do more of this. If you turn this up, you did really well with this, get on top of this person, speak to whatever, it's all being positive. I then sit the team down, and I've always written down on a whiteboard the 3 key points, and the 3 key points on offense, 3 key points on defense, and they link to our game plan. So the senior players pretty much know what's going to happen. And this was the time when we had some of the younger players that I mentioned before in. So I walked through the door, didn't go around any of the players, and I stood there. After about 2 minutes, I'd let them hydrate and the physios do what they need to do. I then said, right, sit down. I deliberately dropped the flip chart or whiteboard on the floor, and I could see people looking to think this is different. And I actually turned around and said, this is not acceptable. I can't go around because you're not a team, you're a group of individuals, and therefore I'm not speaking to you. We need to work on some positives. So the reason I mention that is it was a very controlled decision that I spoke to the assistant coach. We talked on our headsets, I sit in the stand, and we made a decision. So I made a controlled decision that my reaction was to show that I was so disappointed that they didn't deserve the normal team talk. And we got a positive reaction from the players, and we got an outcome that we actually drew the game. We didn't win it, but we drew the game. And the reason I mention it is we can use our coach behaviours to get a response from people. And sometimes that type of frustration and anger works, but if we're not controlling what we're doing, people switch off. People don't always react. So it's not just about managing the pressure of the athletes, our players, but it's also ourselves. So are we in control, and how do we react? How do we do it when things aren't going right? I'm sending these slides through. So some things that we need to think about to develop the skills that underpin the bits for us and for athletes. And I think that's a crucial one from Dan Amiams, who's a sports site that works in football and golf. So how do we put the confidence in our players in order to perform and to unpick that motivation? And then this is one that Rob asked me to do before about your halftime team talks, and I mentioned it then. So in brief, without realising it. So things for me in our time talks: be prepared, know exactly what you're going to say. So I know we don't get often a lot on the side of the field, but take that moment to make a note. What are the things and messages you're going to give? Don't feel you have to rush in. Utilise the time effectively. Let them have a drink, go to the toilet so they're there. Make sure the staff know their roles. Don't have people talking over you. Don't have people doing things. The physios in my team know exactly how they operate and how they treat a player. If the player needs treating, they take them to the side so it's not a distraction for everyone else. Asking your players to switch on. So eyes on me is a simple one that we use, but it's how they focus. I sit in a particular place so that I can see every player's eyes. I want to be able to see my players. And there's an expectation that I don't hide from them, they don't hide from me. And the 3x3 is a real simple thing. So it's 3 points and a maximum of 3 minutes. That's the maximum that I would ever have. And the crucial thing for me is peak end theory. I always finish on a positive. So even if I've got a frustration, we go straight back to it and we finish on that positive. And the key bit that I didn't write down there is there's no surprises. So, and this is my personal philosophy, my team talk at half time, I'm not going to bring something we haven't discussed out because that's not fair on the players. That's down to my poor planning. So there's no surprises. We work on what I discussed and what we agreed as a game plan before. I don't suddenly say we suddenly need to do this. That's unfair on the players. And I mentioned this right at the beginning. So crucial thing for me as a coach is if we need to motivate, develop players, get them to understand pressure and stress, we need to do it in such a way that they don't stop the sport and participate just because of the way that we treated them.
Chris, that's wonderful. Thank you. So lots and lots and lots of good stuff there. As Chris said, these slides will be shared and I can share them out. But we've got a couple of minutes for anyone to throw in any questions. Dive in.
I've got a quick question. Game time coaching. Are you a coach that's giving instructions from the sideline when the game's going on, or are you a coach who lets them get on with it?
Both is the honest answer. As a rule, I try not to dive in. But obviously, I'm fortunate enough that, and that really depends on the team. So when I'm coaching internationally, I'm up in the sky, so there are things I can see that people on the sideline can't always see. So they get a better view of certain things than I do, and I get a different view. So communication with my assistant is a key thing for me. He's brilliant. One of the things when I first worked with Tom was everything I discussed with him, he'd end up taking on the field and we'd have cognitive load. So we have a real good thing about queuing it in. So as a rule, I'm not trying to throw lots of things at lots of people all the time. And certainly if I'm working, like I was mentioning to Rob and some of the guys that were on earlier, I coached the under 18s team, my son's team. And for them, for me, they just go out and play. So there's times when we'll talk. If we concede a try or we score a tie, there are moments in the game where we can have a conversation. Most of that is just about reinforcing positive stuff. Every now and again, and I know it sounds daft, but I find this is a bit unfair because of the level I've been lucky enough to coach at. It would be very easy for me to have a set of robots and go, if we get to their third in player, he defends in this particular style. So he might defend in. If you do this and this, we'll get lots of points. But that's not really the players learning and working it out for themselves. So particularly with the juniors, I let them just work it out for themselves, explore that. And my job really is in training to develop it so they're better at seeing those things themselves. Hopefully that sort of answered your question.
Brilliant.
I think that is quite an interesting skill, the balance between getting players to do a specific thing balanced with getting the players to work it out for themselves. I know I haven't worked that out yet. If anyone's got any quick snippets of sort of to reinforce that as a key coaching skill, that balance? Anyone?
I was just looking at it from a point of view of different coaches that have been on and we've spoken to. I think the men's lacrosse coach was more of as the game's going on, he was like considering what's going on and not really very vocal. Whereas the lady that was on regarding the women's rugby, she was saying that, you know, if she can see that things are not going right on the pitch, she'll be vocal because of the fact that, you know, they spent all week training for this game and it's not happening, so she'd be vocal on the pitch. It was a case of, you know, trying to compare and see if there's any, you know, which I suppose it's what works for you, isn't it, at the end of the day?
I think you're just going to add to that. It's not even what works for you, is it? It's what works for your athletes. So the question
true.
is what to hear. You know, me and Rob were chatting about this thing when we call up. So I'm a Leeds United fan, and it's interesting to watch Bielsa. So he's screaming and shouting on the sideline. Now, given that he does have actually better English than he does in the media, but given that he has a translator, I'm not sure how shouting. I know the stadiums are empty, but shouting across the field, how much do people do it? So your sport might have key moments. Rugby league, we used to be allowed to have a player on the field. A team runner, trainer on the field all the time, pretty much. They then changed the rules, but internationally you can still have one on, so you can have it for an interchange. So what happens now if you watch the physiotherapists who technically are on for an injury, if you watch, they coach the players. So because they're not allowed on, so the physios talk. When we do an interchange, you're allowed to stay on for 3 play the ball. So if you watch, a trainer will run on, he'll actually talk to 2 or 3 players and give information. He'll then run to the player he's hooking. They'll go off the field, they'll stay on. And we've even had coaches at international level, at senior professional level, leaving the person in the line, so it looks like we've got an extra defender while we're doing a change. So I think it's the minutes you've got. We've got about a minute every time minute and a half every time you concede a try. When you stood under the sticks, there's an opportunity for a message. Obviously, when you restart and you've scored and you're back with kick-off, there's an opportunity for a message. Boxing, if you think about it, they've got the timeouts. So I think it's understanding your sport and what's the message you're going to give and how do you get it to everybody, because that's the challenge with the team sport. I talk a little bit like we have a hand rule in the team. I learned a lot. I wanted to give everything as a teacher. I wanted to give everything to everyone, and so we have the hand rule. We have a set of senior players who need to know everything. We have key players that have key playing positions, and then you've got other players on the fringes that don't need to know as much. So sometimes our communication is based on they don't need to know it because either it frustrates them and worries them. They can't retain the information, so it's just a waste of time. If I'm honest, some of my players aren't the brightest ones as well. They're good at what they do. And then I've got key players who need to understand that. So I think there's a strategy about meeting the players' needs first, meeting the constraints of your sport and the opportunities to communicate, and then how effective it can be. I think you've got to work out that interplay to work out is it useful or is it not. I've seen my son's football team. I've actually seen when he was 14 or 15. I've seen the coach shout so many instructions to the midfield that they stopped playing to listen to him, and the team players went through him and they scored, and they shouting because they weren't reacting and they're too busy listening to him. So yeah, you've got to understand those constraints, I think.
I think we've seen. Well, we may have seen. I've been guilty of that, trying to shout things on the field, and no one's listening to me. I'm still shouting at them, and they continue to listen to me. Great stuff. Right, what we'll do, I'll just give one more opportunity for anyone to throw any questions at Chris.
I'll go on there then, Rob. Especially with so many competitions having been cancelled, what sort of what can you use for motivation, especially for youth lacrosse, when all they really want to do is get out and play games? If that's not there, any sort of ideas on extra motivation there?
Well, I think the interesting one is that's knowing that is a big thing, isn't it? So I can give you a real life example where it's different. In rugby league, they put loads of little mini games out and encourage everyone to do it. My son's in an under-18 team. The coaches put loads of challenges out. The players weren't doing it, it was the dads. So the reality is that the kids were like, we're not bothered, we're connecting on Xbox. So I think you need to be really clear on what's the intention of what you do. So if you know that your players are interested in games, and when we talked before about bringing them back, what is it that your training sessions look like? So for me, if I know that they're massively motivated by games, I'd be putting a high volume of competition in everything we do. I would be maybe even for the next 4 or 5 weeks, splitting them into teams where there's points. So we're carrying on the competition all the time. It might be that you put them in even in the warm-ups and some of the non-specific, you might split them by position. So we sometimes do forward versus back as a regular, or even when I did the England setup, it'd be basically Lancashire versus Yorkshire, because that's predominantly where a lot of our players are, and the others fitted in. So how do you create that competition within it? So let's use the desire to want to play team games, sports and activities to motivate them. So let's get them back to what they're coming for. So I think that's the first thing. And then you might dial back the things that you want to put in to meet their needs. So there's always a trade-off, isn't there? I was doing something yesterday where whenever we have an intention for a practice or a warm-up or an activity, there's always a trade-off. So if you want to put more physicality in it, you're probably going to shorten it up. And so it's being aware of those. So if the priority is to motivate your players, then the trade-off might be we do less technical stuff, but we play more games, and it's more fun, engaging stuff, because that's what I want to do. I want to motivate them. I want everybody back for every minute to do it. So it's that trade-off, but understanding how you tune into your individual players. For me.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Good question, David. We've all got, obviously, the senior lacrosse, we're back into competitions, but Pete, I don't know when if there's going to be when the first junior kind of club competitions can be played, when the juniors get back up, playing like Guildfords and the Portsmouths, things like that. So yeah, finding that motivation. Right, what are we training for? Because a lot of events, as David said, have been cancelled over this last few months for the obvious reasons. Good stuff. Right, final call for any questions.
I suppose I was just going to say the self-awareness thing was quite good, and understanding what's going on in the players' minds was quite an interesting one. Going back from personal experience, we used to be obviously training to make the international team, and what we used to do was we used to play games against teams from America. And my perception at the time was I played defence, and I'd be always marking the best. The majority of times it was the best player that I was marking. And in my mind, I was like the cannon fodder, because as a team, we had obviously the team hadn't been selected. You was competing to make the world team. So in my mind, it was, why am I always the one who gets beat, or why am I always the one who's against the best player? So it was as if it was like self-doubt. But then following on from that, in the next World Championships, we had a sports psychologist, and chatting to him, he was like saying, where are you coming from with these views? Who's told you that? And it was like, well, that was just what was going on in my head at the time. So it became more with maturity and age, and then chatting to somebody about it, it became a realization that, well, actually, they're not, you sort of like get that bit of self-confidence. So yeah, so that's on a personal level. It's trying to find out what's going on in the player's mind, because they might not be thinking the same thing as what you're thinking.
Definitely. Great things on the site that I got down that making self-talk. And it's just because you say it to yourself doesn't mean you have to believe it, does it? And that, but we don't find out what's going on in our players. And thanks for sharing that, because the classic is different players will respond in a different way to that situation, won't they? So some will become protected, and maybe even, I'm not going to do anything that's risk-taking because I don't want to look stupid, because I want to get in the world team. Others might go, right, I'm going to try and bully this person and try and push him off the game. So there's various different ways that a person might react. And if we don't understand what's going on, we don't understand that. And the prime example for me in rugby league is when people make a mistake, you go one or two ways. They either try and get it back, which usually means from an error we give a penalty. So they try too hard, they drop on and they go and smack somebody to prove a point, and we get a penalty off the back of it. Conversely, they go in the shell and they hide, and actually if somebody spots that, they'll play on somebody. And you know, I'm sure your sport's the same. You can isolate somebody who's feeling down, and you can put pressure on them, and pressure, and then you're exactly what you just said. They start to believe that everyone's ganging up on me, self-belief, it's not working for me. And it's right back to what I said at the beginning, what you highlighted there, self-awareness. We don't know what's going on in a player's head. So is it, I always have this dilemma when things are going wrong with junior players. You leave them out there because it's developmental and they work it out themselves, and actually risk that it's so damaging that they never come back from it, or do you take them off? And then when do you take them off? Because if I substitute a player and it's at the wrong moment, in their mind, I'm just reinforcing they can't do that point. And it's almost, I've learned a bit of a lesson with youth players that I never make the change immediately, because then they attack the substitution with that error, which then potentially means that they might do something less risky in the future. But then we'll substitute them. Then we'll have a conversation about what they did and what we could think about afterwards. And then crucial for me is they go back on. There's no point telling somebody you need to do this, this, and this, and leave them on the sideline for another 20 minutes, 30 minutes till the end of the game, because they never get a chance to put it right. And as you all probably think in your own mind, if you don't put it right, and if you've had a bad game, you know, it's never nice having a bad game, is it? But having a bad last game of the season being a shocker is terrible, isn't it? Pre-season and all that off-season, it kills you because you haven't been able to fix it. So for me, my belief is that you always put the player back on to be able to fix it. So if I take someone off at a junior level and we've done a substitution, we always talk about it being developmental. They go back on to finish that.
And I suppose that's where Lacrosse is fortunate. We've got rolling subs, so as a coach, we've got the ability to get people off, have that quick chat with them, because you know they should be on within a minute or so. It's certainly for the midfielders who are always rotating on and off, slightly more difficult to pull off an attacker or a defender. Come on, just get off for just for 2 minutes, and sometimes that's a bit of a challenge to pull off someone if you want to have a quick word with them and getting them back on again, say the next opportunity. Good stuff. Right.
Just before we go, somebody mentioned the pressure going back. One of the things for me is, and it's a real simple strategy, and we sometimes break ours up, but it's like hold the performance. So when we're going back, we don't know how fit they are, we don't know whatever. So the challenge is, when we're talking about competition, is how long can we hold our performance for? So it might be that we set ourselves a challenge that for 8 minutes we're going to hold our performance, or 9 minutes, or 10 minutes. So that they're not competing against the opposition, they're competing against your performance level. So you can encourage them to do that. And we do that in rugby league. So when a team's the underdog and our game is predominantly, you know, it's 2 40-minute halves, we'll split it into 20 minutes or 10 minutes. And so we'll judge the game based on those segments. So whilst the result is it, so we might lose the game, but actually we might have won three of what we call moments. So out of the 8 moments we might have won. It's so just those sort of things work really well, I think. That's us being told by the boss that it's time. Well,
that's my kids coming and going, you're supposed to be playing with us.
Exactly.
Right, Chris, thank you
No
very
problem.
much for joining us this morning. Please send me those slides across. I'll get them shared when I share this recording. Thanks for those who have joined and the good questions coming in. We have now got only a few hours to go before Lacrosse is back. So lots and lots of good stuff to take into our training sessions whenever they may start. My first one is next weekend, and I get my team together for the first time. Right then, we will leave it there. I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you very much.
Thank you.